Folks, I hope you're doing well, and welcome to episode 9 of WAPTSS, aka We All Practice the Same Stuff. If you don't already know, this is a series where every other week I'll be bringing us all an exercise that we can practice together. And if you want more information, I'd highly recommend checking out episode 1. So, life can be hard. We all know this. In fact, today I'm wearing 2 left socks. I know it's weird, but these specific socks have left and right marked, and somehow I got 2 lefts. Look, I promise it says L and L, man. I'm such a mess. So, what do we do when life gets hard? Well, nowadays it's super common to just jump on Google and slap in guide for blah blah blah. Unfortunately, a guide for pairing the right socks together is more of a common sense thing and less of a need for a guide thing. But there's many other things in life that we can just find a guide and it'll make it a lot easier. In fact, there's a lot of things that in my life I look back on now and think, man, I really wish I had a guide in that moment. But the past is the past, and so at least now I can try to use a guide when I'm playing guitar. Now, this guide that I'm specifically talking about for the guitar today is called a guide finger. And just a heads up, today's WAPTSS is not necessarily an exercise, but rather a concept that we can use and apply to our pieces and what we're practicing. So, what's this guide finger? So typically a guide finger will help us shift from one chord or note to another chord or note. So to give you an example from an arrangement I'll be putting out pretty soon, I start on this chord here, and I want to shift up to this chord here. Now at first I was thinking, man, this is kind of a big jump and it's kind of a fast jump, so this is going to be pretty difficult, going from here to here quickly and smoothly. But then I thought, well, maybe I can implement a guide finger and it would make this a lot easier. So maybe an easy way to think of a guide finger is you're prepping a finger early and then just shifting the finger up to the next chord. So if we look at these 2 chords, this one we can see that my pinky is here on the B string. So in the previous chord, I'm going to prep my pinky, and right after I play that chord, put it on the B string, and then just slide up to this next chord. So something like a guide finger can really help take the guesswork out of moving from one chord to another chord. It can be really hard to just try and plant all 3 fingers fast and fluently. But if we can use that guide finger, it means that our pinky finger is already planted, it's ready to go, and it can help the other fingers shift up and be ready. So now I'm only thinking about these 2 fingers here, not the pinky finger anymore. Now, one thing to keep in mind with guide fingers is that they typically work better on the G, B, and E string. That's because, like I said, we're going to be sliding that finger up. And so those G, B, and E strings, you don't get a lot of sound with a slide. But if you're on the E, A, or D strings, since these are steel wound strings, you're gonna hear that shift a lot more. And so you can still use guide fingers on these strings, but it's typically better to try and stay away from them as much as possible, or do your best to try and make that sound not noticeable. So this sounds like a super simple concept, and it is, but it's such an incredibly useful idea to keep in mind when you're practicing and preparing pieces. When you're doing big shifts in pieces, it can really help simplify these shifts and make them much, much easier to play. And so like I said earlier, today is not really an exercise that I'm giving us all to practice, but rather I'm encouraging you guys to try and find some places in whatever you're practicing or the pieces you're practicing where you can implement guide fingers to make things easier. The first obvious place to start would be anywhere difficult in your piece, especially anywhere where a shift occurs, and see if you can implement these guide fingers to make it easier. So instead of sharing an exercise for us all to practice, I'll just show you what I'll be practicing. In the coming months, I hope to be re-releasing some of my old arrangements because I wasn't very happy with how I performed them, how I recorded them, so I want to make them better. And so in this process of trying to relearn some of these pieces, I found that I can make things a lot simpler by implementing guide fingers. So I'm going to be working on one specific part from the Super Smash Bros. Melee theme. This particular part I think is really important to nail, and I've always found it really hard, but after revisiting it and trying to implement guide fingers, it has made it so much easier to play. So the first part is this here, which has no guide fingers, but the next shift is down here. And so I've started to implement the guide finger with this middle finger here, prepped here, so I can just shift down. The next one is here, and the chord is here. So I plant this ring finger early to make the shift easier. So those two parts together sound something like this. One final time, I really encourage you guys to give guide fingers a try. I've found them so useful and they're one of my favorite things to find when I'm practicing a piece. I appreciate you all so much for watching. If you've been following along with the series and you haven't already, I'd highly recommend checking out the Discord below. Folks, that's going to be everything for this episode. Stay safe and happy practicing.